There we are. Thank you, Rabbi Feigenbaum. It sprang up and it gave the human being what they needed. It's no longer the case. Because Adam and Chava, because, hi Sherry, welcome. Because Adam and Eve had eaten from that Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, we said that the tree of life, the tree of Tov V'Ra, Tov is not good and bad, but permanent. Tov is permanent. Ra is broken. So that was a brokenness that came into being because they preempted eating from means not necessarily eating, but the ideas that are brought forward because of the sin that they committed. In other words, the wrongdoing that they preempted having from the tree of permanence and impermanence and brokenness, and therefore the ground no longer responded to them. Everything that the Torah tells us is not just a story, and it's not just something that you can read about because it's chronologically correct or because it's biographically correct or if it's historically correct, but there's a reason. So when the Torah tells us about Noach, the Torah tells us Noach ish tzaddik. Okay, the word ish, although it means man or person, it's more than that. He was an important person. He was the kind of person that Hashem could entrust his mission to Noah. What was his mission? His mission was to build the teva, to build the ark, because mankind had become so corrupted, so broken, so out of sync with what Hashem created, that Hashem was going to bring a flood. And that flood was going to destroy all of mankind. Noach was building that teva, built that ark, in the full view of everyone. So on the one hand, when we say, Et Elokim hitalech Noach, Noach walked with God, as it were. He didn't walk in front of God. He didn't lead to bring people in. But when people came to ask questions, and when people came to say, what are you doing? Why are you building this humongous ark? He explained to them, things are going very poorly for us in this world. It is a broken world. Because it's a broken world, there are going to be consequences, and Hashem is going to destroy this world. So when we talk about a broken world, what are we talking about? We're talking about every person who was a victim was in turn a perpetrator, and everyone who was a perpetrator was a victim. Everybody, all of humanity turned against one another in a way that was unpalatable and that was absolutely wrong. It was absolutely broken, and therefore it had to be destroyed totally and completely. Noach was not an Abraham. And you know what? You are not me, and I am not you. But et Elokim hitalech Noach. Noach, as it were, was in that straight line along with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, along with God. And he did whatever Hashem wanted him to do. And if he wasn't a leader, perhaps he wouldn't, obviously we see that he wasn't, but when you read the commentators, and I love what Rabbi Shimon Schwab says. Rabbi Shimon Schwab was a contemporary. I think he died in about the 1980s. He was a rabbi in Baltimore and in New York, and wrote a book called Mayan Bet HaShoeva, the font that we draw water from, which is the Torah. And he explains over there that although Noah wasn't a leader in the way that Abraham Avinu was a leader, he's still one of the reasons why he didn't tell people the details of what was going to happen was that he still kept hoping that people were going to turn back towards the correct way of behaving. And he didn't want to he didn't want people to feel that now Hashem is definitely going to. So if you know, what's the use? What's the use of my doing teshuvah? What's the use of my repenting? If this is a decree that has been signed and sealed, what do I need to care about it? Noach didn't want people to feel that way. And right up to the very, very end, when the waters started pouring down, Noach still didn't go into the teva until Hashem said to him, go into the teva now, or you will also perish. The teva had 3 layers. The top layer was the layer that the people lived in. Noach, his 3 sons, and their wives. During that time, Noach and his sons took care of all of the animals in the teva. You know that there were 7 of each kosher animal, 7 pairs of kosher animals, and 2 pairs of non-kosher animals. Only the animals, and when I tell you that the people and the animals at the time of Noach had corrupted themselves to such a degree that the animals that would never mate with different species were doing so, which is totally unnatural. And those animals that mated with species that were not their own were not saved. Many animals perished. Anyone, anything with human life in it, human or animalistic life in it, perished in the flood. What we do learn is that what didn't perish in the flood were mountains and trees and some plants. So even though the waters came up from the bottom and upward and from the top and down, and it caused a total upheaval, and it changed every bit of nature, but yet, these plants and these mountains remained and were there. In fact, the teva stopped on the top of a mountain. The name of that mountain was Har Ararat, the mountain of Ararat. And it was a flat-topped mountain where the teva, the ark, rested. And that was where Noach and his family stayed until the world was habitable. Now, when I tell you that there was such a terrific upheaval from the bottom to the top and from the top down, it should have taken years to dry up, and yet it did not. It took a very limited amount of time. The first time that Noach sent a bird out to see, the raven went out to see, but the raven never came back, and so Noach sent the dove out. How do we know that there was still foliage? Because when the dove came back, she came back with an olive branch in her beak. So we know that Noach saw that it was still too wet for him to go out, but he knew that there were still trees there. So when Adam, I keep saying Adam, I'm sorry, when Noah and his family came out of the Teva, Noah thought, now that the whole world has been destroyed, that Ra, that brokenness must have been expiated. And therefore, we're living in a world of before the sin in Gan Eden. And therefore, that was why Noah decided to plant a vineyard, because whoever wants to bring a korban, a sacrifice to Hashem, one of the essentials that is needed for a sacrifice is wine. And so he planted the vineyard because he wanted to bring sacrifices to Hashem. And he thought, now that we're back in the time as though we were before the sin, I will not need this clothing, because just like Adam and Chava didn't need clothing, we will not need clothing, which is why he undressed. And when he drank some of the wine, the potency of the wine was so strong that he immediately became intoxicated, not intoxicated enough to have to be unaware of his surroundings, but intoxicating enough so that he was almost paralyzed by the effect of the wine. He saw that Ham came in with his son Canaan, and that they laughed and giggled and acted totally inappropriately towards him, and then left the room and went out to tell his brothers, Ham's brothers, Shem and Yefet, that what had happened to their father. When Shem and Yefet came in, they did not come in the way that Ham did. Now there are three sons, Shem and Ham and Yafet. That's not in the order of their birth, but it's in the order of their greatness, with Ham in between, because he needed that support from both right and left, from Shem and from Yefet. So when Shem and Yefet came in, they walked in backwards so that they would not see their father lying on the floor, and they covered him with a blanket so that their father would not be embarrassed, and then went out of the room. The Abarbanel, who was a philosophic scholar in the time of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. He lived in the 15 and 1600s, in the 15th and 16th century. The Abarbanel, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, was a Torah scholar. He was a philosopher, and he wrote the most magnificent explanations and commentary on Torah. He writes an essay on the three sons of Noah, and he says, obviously, Noah was great enough that Hashem gave him prophecy. Hashem doesn't give prophecy to anyone, and we mentioned this last time, and it's a really important point. Prophecy is not ESP. Prophecy is not that I see the future. Prophecy is a direct revelation from Hashem for what the person needs to know at that particular time. So if he was on a high enough level, and you would only be on a very high level of spirituality in order to receive prophecy. So therefore, that when Noah continued to receive prophecy from Hashem, it meant that he was still on an exalted level of spirituality. And he saw prophetically who each of these three children were going to be and what their effect would be in the world. We know that Ham acted totally inappropriately. The nature, Ham's nature, was one of brashness. It was one of immorality. It was one of not knowing his boundaries, wanting to take the most of the physical world, the bestial part of the world, not the human part, not the part that honors Hashem, but the part that says, what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? What am I? It's the I-centered world. And the nations that come from Ham are I-centered people who are not moral, who are not intellectual. They are only about what I can do to enhance my desires, whether they are correct desires or incorrect desires. Yafet, the word yafeh, yofi, comes from Yafet. Yafet was interested in the beauty of the world. He wasn't just interested in beauty as in artwork, as in fine woven garments, beautiful silks. He was also interested in the intellectual beauty that Hashem put into the world. And as long as Yefet, and the pasuk reads, Yaft Elokim li Yefet, kishu yoshev be'ohalei Shem. Yefet is beautiful, and his beauty, his appreciation of beauty is correct, as long as he's influenced by those that live in the tent, as it were, in the sphere, in the world of shame. So Yefet has any country, any nation that is inclined towards beauty. The Incas in South America, who are known to be a nation that have beautiful works of art. The Eastern countries, China, Japan, India, even parts of Egypt, although Egypt is Ham and not Yefet, but those countries that are have an aptitude for beauty, they come from Yefet. When Yefet is influenced by shame, by the intellect, by the intelligence, by the spirituality of shame, he brings that beauty onto a higher spiritual level. But when he is not, then he becomes influenced by Ham. And Ham is the egocentric. Ham is the one that doesn't know boundaries. And so Yefet then becomes like Ham. So when we see that Greece, when they were totally hedonistic, that was when they were like Ham. When they were philosophically inclined, and when they looked at the world with eyes that wanted to understand perhaps the spirituality of the world, that was because of the influence of Shem. So Yefet could go either way. He could either be totally spiritual, or he could sink down to the level of Cham and become totally hedonistic, which we saw as the hegemony of Greece began to falter, and the Romans came in with the sword and with the strength and with the heartlessness. Then that is a Cham piece, not a Shem piece. Shem is the nation, is the part of Noah that received the Torah. Remember, we always say that when Yaakov had to run from Esav because he received the bracha, where did he go? He went to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. Shem is the grandfather, and Aver was the grandson. And they were spiritually, very highly spiritually inclined, and were they influenced the world with their spirituality. So here we have the three nations that are going into their different parts of the world, and they start breeding from wherever they were. So the Torah tells us that Shem, Cham, and Yafet moved to different areas. Shem moved to the Mesopotamian part of the Fertile Crescent. Cham moved further on towards Greece and towards the east. Sorry, Greece and, no, not Cham. Cham was towards Rome, towards Africa, towards Egypt, and Yefet went to France, Italy, and then the eastern parts of the world. So they all went in their own separate ways, and they all began to proliferate where they were. There were 70 different areas that they spread into, and each one had his spot. We now come to a person by the name of Nimrod. Nimrod was the grandson of Cham. And for many years, Nimrod was a good person. There's no other way to say it. He was a good person who tried to understand, use his intellect to understand what Shem was about. But then, because he was such a good-looking man, people began to adulate him. And that adulation felt good. And that adulation corrupted him. And so Nimrod, now, I'm sorry, I want to just go back for a second. Before the flood, Noah got the garments, inherited the garments that had belonged to Adam. Those garments were given to Cain, and Cain gave them to Noah. Noah had the garments, the garments that Hashem made, and we said that those garments were made of ore, of light, but at the same time blocked any kind of vision, that iver, that it made them people blind to what was inside of those clothes, because they were opaque, they weren't transparent. Even though the material was a very fine material, it was opaque and one couldn't see in. It was iver, it blinded people. But Nimrod took those garments from Noah, and he saw that when he put those garments on, people paid obeisance to him, and he loved it. And he wanted more and more of this obeisance that people were paying to him. And so he said, I am going to build an edifice, because the flood happened 1,656 years. This Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs talks about. He said 1,656 years ago, the flood came. Nimrod said, we will build a tower that is going to be so tall and so strong and so so visible that it cannot be taken down. And he gathered people together who were of one mind along with him. The Torah calls it Safa Echat, one language. It doesn't mean that they all spoke the exact same language. It means that the language of wanting to be remembered for something, wanting to be just seen by everybody as something very special. That was the language that he used. And he gathered elders from all the 70 countries that the people were spread in. And he brought them together to the valley of Shinar. So the Mefarshim, the commentaries, tell us that the valley of Shinar is where the corpses of the people who died in the flood were amassed. And he said, this is the perfect place to build an edifice to ourselves. Let's make this a tower that is so huge. Now, he knew very well that he couldn't reach the heavens, and he wasn't trying to reach the heavens like you would in climbing a ladder to get up there. He knew that was impossible. But what he said was, let this tower be a place, a landmark that says, you know what, Hashem? We're better than you. We're greater than you. We're going to build something that is more everlasting. And therefore, we are going to rebel against you. We don't need you, Hashem, because we can be gods ourselves. And Nimrod was the one who spearheaded this program. And he was the one who brought people together, not because they spoke the same language linguistically, but because they were of one mind to throw the yoke of Hashem off. When they failed, Nimrod did not stop there. But let's talk about the tower for a moment, for a few minutes. The tower was going to be a huge edifice. I think I've said that enough times. And when they started working together with this idea that we are going to be the creme de la creme of the world, everybody is going to come and they're going to worship us. Hashem said to, whenever it says that Hashem said, it's a prophetic vision. So what the Torah is telling us is that Hashem decided that he was going to disrupt this venture. in a way that was almost equivalent of putting different vernacular into their words so that they weren't able to understand, and again, it's in inverted commas, one another. So when we talk about vernacular, there's a story that I love to bring into this, and that story is of the stone cutter. The stone cutter didn't realize it, but this was his lucky day, because whatever he wished for, he was going to get. So when he strapped himself onto the mountain and started to cut the stones, it was hard work. And the sun shone down on him and he was very hot. And so he said, I wish I were the sun. There's the sun. It's there in the sky. And all it does is shine down on people, and it makes them hot, and it makes them sweaty, and it gives them light. I wish I were the sun. No sooner had he said that than he became the sun. Ah, he said, now I can see all over the world. But you know what? The sun has to set. And when it sets in one place, it becomes darkened and it's eclipsed by the moon. I wish I were the moon. I could shine in the darkness and everybody would see me. And of course, no sooner was that out of his mouth than he became the moon. Then the moon goes to sleep and the cloud comes. He says, oh my goodness, there's a cloud that's blocking the moon. Wow, maybe it's the cloud that is so special. And so he became a cloud. And there he was. He was a cloud and he was very happy. He could rain on whoever he wanted to rain on. He could block the sun. But then a wind came and the wind dispersed the cloud. So he said, I wish I were the wind. The wind blows so strongly, it can blow all the trees down. It can scatter the clouds. It can make the clouds come over the sun. I wish I were the wind. And so he became the wind. But then the wind stopped blowing. Oh no, why am I not blowing? Oh, it must be because of that king that I see down on the ground. I want to be the king. Look at all the people bowing down to him. Look how they adore him. I want to be the king. And so, of course, he was the king. Now he's the king and he's in his ermine coat and the sun is beating down on him and there's no wind to give him a cool breeze, and the ermine coat is so heavy, and the carriage is driving along and the heat is relentless. And he sees a stone cutter, and the stone cutter is shaded by the mountain. And he says, I wish I were a stone cutter. Maybe the stone cutter is the best of them all. So you see, it doesn't matter who we are or what we are. If we're not happy within ourselves, then nothing's going to make us happy. So when the Nimrod tried to build the Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, and people were no longer singing his praises, and there was disunity and disharmony amongst everyone, and he had to flee. And there was the tower. It was abandoned. It was a thought that was a great thought. It was an idea that was a wonderful idea. But now they're not talking in the same way. And because they're not talking in the same way, everyone has been dispersed. And that same language is no longer on the same plane. So Hashem disrupted the building of the Tower of Babel. Babel means confusion. What happened to our wonderful idea? Everybody went back to where they came from. And Nimrod is still that prestigious person that people are bowing down to all the time. He had a very special advisor whose name was Terach. Terach, and we know that Terach was the father of Abraham, but he didn't. Terach used to advise Nimrod on what he should do, what he shouldn't do, how he should do it. And Nimrod found Terach to be a very, very wise man. Terach decided that idolatry was a very profitable business. Now, I just want to warn you that we do not understand, A, what idolatry was about, B, the power that idolatry had, and C, how idolatry is the total antithesis of Judaism. So I'm going to try and explain it the best that I can. And the first way to explain it is that idolatry had such a magnetism to it that it was so very difficult. People saw the power of the sun, as did our woodcutter, stonecutter. They saw the power of the sun and the moon and the stars. They're unreachable, but they must be a servant of Hashem so that they can reach Hashem in a better way than the human being can reach Hashem. Their idea was not to cut Hashem dead, but their idea was to have an intermediary that was going to bring their problems and their ideas and their closeness to Hashem through the auspices of the particular type of idol that they were worshiping. Not that they thought that the idol itself had some special powers, but that shape in some way affected and was able to get the courtiers' ears to be able to talk to Hashem on a one-to-one basis. The reason we do not understand the magnetism of idolatry was that it was so very strong that it was almost impossible for the Jewish people to let go of it. They had been so exposed to idolatrous ideas that even though they had experienced a revelation of Hashem on a level that far exceeded anything anybody else has ever known, that magnetism to idolatry was very difficult to break. And so the Anshe Knesset of Hagadolah, the men of the Great Assembly, at the time just before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, prayed to daven to Hashem and said, please take the magnetism of idolatry out of the world. Now, once idolatry is taken out of the world, so is immorality, so is any kind of action that has any kind of ego attached to it. And so the cattle stopped mating, the chickens stopped laying eggs, people stopped working because everything became lackadaisical. And so Hashem said, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, went back to Hashem and they said, Hashem, what can we do to break the magnetism of idolatry, but still keep everything else that we need in this world? And Hashem said, this is a world of balance. When something negative is taken out of the world, then something positive has to be taken out. The negativity was idol worship. The positivity was the one-to-one connection of Hashem to the human being, and that is prophecy. So at the same time that the magnetism to idolatry was taken out, nevuah, prophecy, also was taken out, so that the world, which is a world of balance, could once again be balanced. So we don't understand that magnetism, but it was very, very strong. So here was Terach, who had been married for many, many years. Now his father had a child at the age of 25. He was now the age of 75, 90, 75, and 50, sorry, he was the age of 50 and he didn't have children. And he kept davening to Hashem for children. He told Nimrod, you are not going to succeed as an idolater. You will come a cropper one of these days. Something is going to happen that's going to break you. And Nimrod said, it doesn't matter. When people worship me, it feels so good. I don't care what happens in the future. Terach continued to be Nimrod's advisor until he and his wife fell pregnant. And when she fell pregnant, there was a meteor that went across the sky. And that meteor, the astrologers said, is the power of Avraham Avinu, of Abraham. There will be a child born who is going to subsume all of the idolaters of the world with the Kedusha, with the spirituality that he will use to connect people with Hashem. And Nimrod said, this child has to be killed. And so he measured the amount of time. All girls were brought to his palace and he gave them beautiful gifts. Boys were killed. You know, that should ring a bell with something that happened later on in the Jewish people's lives, because there's nothing that is new under the sun. When Abraham was born, and again, this is very indicative of later when Moshe Rabbeinu was born, when Moses was born. When Abraham Avinu was born, Terach knew that Nimrod's servants were going to come for him. At the same time that Abraham was born, one of his servants gave birth to a male child as well. Terach took the baby, the servant's baby, to his wife to nurse, and Nimrod's messengers came in and grabbed the child and took the child to Nimrod. Abraham Avinu was sequestered in a cave for the first 3 years of his life, and even after that, his comings and goings were very, very rare. But it became clear to Nimrod that Abraham Avinu had not been killed. And so he said to Terach, bring your son to me. I will make you the richest person in the world. And Terach said, I'm not giving you my child. That's my child. And so Abraham continued to grow until the time that he ruined Terach's business. by breaking down all of the idols. And an idea to ponder, I'm just putting it out there, that the breaking of the idols is not so much breaking of wooden edifices, but it's breaking of ideas. Because Abraham Avinu was a scientist. He looked at this world and he said, this is too intricate a world, a universe, to be run by idols, to be run by sun or moon or stars. I'm going to start with the very beginning. He started to look at the insect colonies, the ants, how they behave, the bees that had a queen bee that was that the worker bees adored. And he moved up from insects to swarming creatures to the animal kingdom to the human being. And then he said, I don't know where to go from here, because there is nothing in this world that I can see that could possibly be eternal and could possibly have created everything that I see in this world, which is when Hashem appeared to Abraham and told him through prophetic vision that he would be the Av Hamon Goyim, that he would be the father of many nations. And when Nimrod finally was able to get his hands on Abraham, and he said to Abraham, we have built a furnace that is so hot, it's been heating for 3 days. They tied his hands behind his back and put him into this furnace, and yet he walked out unscathed, except for one thing. The cords that were around his hands had burned off. Think of it not so much as a furnace, but as the ideas, how Nimrod put him in such a hot spot, as it were, where everybody was looking for him and wanting his death, because the reward for his death would be so great. And the idea and the idols are the ideas and ideology of Hashem that he was searching for and was beginning to understand more and more what Hashem was and is and will be. And at that point, Hashem said, now you have to lech lecha me'artzecha. Now you have to leave this place, because in this place, you will not be able to grow in the manner that you need to grow. You will not be able to prosper in the manner that you need to prosper. And therefore, you are Me'aver, you are Abraham Ha'ivri. You're the other side of the entire world. Everybody is against you. I will take you to a place where you will not be searched for, where you will not be the other side, but that you will be the one who guides others to find what you have found, so that they too can understand that they owe allegiance not to a Nimrod, not to an idol, and not to a form of nature, but to Hashem. So that's what we're going to tackle next week. We're going to look at Abraham, and how Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, how they are the tripod of the Jewish nation. And we need all three of them, and they need the support of the wives that they married, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, which we will talk about in our last session. Any questions? No? So If there are no questions, nobody has a question or a comment? Okay,
No, thank you.
all right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all for coming, and I hope
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Very, very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you all. Good night.
Bye. Oh, Judy did get